America isn't bracing for its next recession anymore. It's already living through it. Even as leaders in Washington continue to claim the economy is holding strong, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. Debt levels are ballooning, foreclosures are picking up speed, and state governments are scraping by with budgets stretched to the breaking point. According to Moody's, close to one-third of the entire U.S. economy is already operating in recession-like conditions. Retirement systems are running short on funds, credit ratings are slipping, and families are leaving their home states in the hundreds of thousands, searching for stability elsewhere. What used to be called the American dream now feels more like a ticking timer. This isn't speculation or some distant warning. It's unfolding right now. And as the country drifts deeper into what could become its most serious economic downturn in decades, these are the 12 states that are starting to crack first. Number 12, Colorado. Colorado used to symbolize modern prosperity, thriving tech hubs, outdoor wealth, and steady growth. But beneath that polished image sits an economy far more fragile than it appears. Behind the picturesque skylines of Denver and Boulder, warning signs are spreading quickly. Home prices remain stubbornly high, with the median hovering around $570,000, while the typical household brings in roughly $92,000 a year. That imbalance means many residents would have to dedicate nearly 46% of their take-home pay just to manage a standard mortgage, an unsustainable squeeze for most families. At the same time, the job market is starting to crack. Statewide unemployment has climbed to 4.3%, its highest level since early 2021, largely fueled by sweeping layoffs in the tech sector. In 2024 alone, more than 11,000 positions disappeared as companies like Google, Zoom, and Salesforce scaled back after expanding too aggressively during the pandemic surge. The fallout is especially visible in commercial real estate. Office space in downtown Denver now sits more than 31% vacant, an all-time high, forcing landlords to slash rents by as much as 40% just to attract tenants. Property values in the commercial sector have already fallen 25% from their 2022 highs, while delinquent business loans have doubled in just 1 year. The state's finances reflect the same downward trend. Colorado is staring at a projected $1.6 billion budget gap by 2026, driven by declining income tax revenue and rapidly growing pension commitments. The Public Employees Retirement Association alone is burdened with $35 billion in unfunded liabilities, creating a looming fiscal threat that grows larger each year. Even tourism, long considered Colorado's economic safety valve, is losing momentum. Visitor spending dropped 7% in 2024, and ski resorts saw traffic fall by 10%, hurt by fewer international travelers and soaring lodging prices. Outside the major cities, the pressure is even more severe. Communities like Pueblo and Mesa County are seeing foreclosure rates climb toward 1 in every 310 homes, placing them among the hardest-hit areas in the Mountain West. Taken together, Colorado's once bright boom is concealing a risky collision of factors: sky-high housing costs, a weakening employment base, and collapsing demand for commercial space. If the recession intensifies, the Centennial State's heavy debt load and inflated property values may give way all at once, like a massive snowpack breaking loose, sudden, violent, and impossible to stop. Number 11. Mississippi. Mississippi has carried the label of America's poorest state for decades, but 2025 could mark the moment when its already delicate economy finally gives way. The numbers alone tell a sobering story. Median household income sits at just $49,111, roughly 60% of the national average, leaving little margin for error. Poverty affects 18.1% of the population, meaning nearly 1 out of every 5 Mississippians is struggling below the poverty line. Job conditions offer little relief. Unemployment has climbed to 5.2%, while labor force participation has fallen to 55.6%, the lowest rate in the entire country. The state's dependence on federal support makes the situation even more precarious. Nearly 46% of Mississippi's total budget is funded by Washington, a reliance that becomes dangerous as federal spending cuts loom and recession pressures build. If those funds are reduced, the impact could ripple quickly through local governments, public schools, and already strained hospital systems. Housing trends are flashing warning signs as well. Although median home values remain relatively low at around $176,000, rising mortgage rates and stagnant wages have effectively sidelined buyers. Foreclosure filings have jumped 32% compared to last year, hitting cities like Jackson and Greenville especially hard. Greenville, in particular, is projected to see the steepest home price decline in the nation, with values expected to fall 16.6% by mid-2025. Commercial activity is weakening across smaller cities, where vacancy rates have risen 18% and small businesses are disappearing under the weight of record-high consumer credit card debt. Adding to the strain is aging infrastructure. Nearly 28% of the state's bridges are considered structurally deficient, while debt per taxpayer is nearing $7,800. Healthcare conditions are deteriorating at the same time. Since 2020, 6 rural hospitals have shut their doors, leaving more than 300,000 residents without access to nearby emergency care. Mississippi's combination of deep poverty, low educational attainment, and limited economic diversity leaves it especially vulnerable as the downturn accelerates. If federal aid contracts and inflation continues to erode already tight household budgets, many of the state's small towns could face something far worse than a routine recession. What looms instead is the risk of a prolonged, systemic breakdown, an economic collapse that unfolds slowly, relentlessly, and with lasting consequences. Number 10. Maryland. For decades, Maryland's economic strength has been tightly linked to Washington, D.C., and that connection is now turning into a serious liability. The state is being squeezed by a risky combination of high living expenses, cooling job growth, and heavy exposure to potential federal budget cuts. More than 28,700 federal jobs are located within Maryland's borders, giving it the highest federal employment exposure ratio in the country. When Congress delays funding or reduces agency budgets, those paychecks disappear almost overnight, along with the tax revenue Maryland depends on to keep its finances stable. Credit agencies are already sounding alarms. In 2025, Moody's lowered Maryland's credit outlook, pointing directly to the state's overdependence on federal activity. Meanwhile, everyday affordability is slipping out of reach. Median home prices sit near $430,000, and even with a median household income of $98,400, residents are struggling to keep pace with inflation, rising property taxes, and mortgage rates averaging around 7%. The strain is showing in the housing market, where foreclosures have jumped 29% since 2023. Baltimore alone now accounts for more than 95 bank-owned REO properties, placing it among the highest concentrations in the nation. Commercial real estate is weakening just as quickly. Office vacancy rates across the Baltimore metro area have climbed past 22%, while rents have dropped below $19 per square foot, the lowest level seen in 10 years. Even Montgomery County's once booming biotech corridor is losing momentum, shedding jobs as venture capital investment falls 40% compared to last year. At the same time, the state's fiscal outlook continues to darken. Maryland is projecting a $700 million budget gap by 2026, and its pension obligations are nearing $25 billion. The Rainy Day Fund, which holds only $2.9 billion, could be drained in less than 12 months if a severe recession takes hold. The contradiction is striking. Despite being one of the most highly educated states in the country, Maryland may be among the first to feel the pain of a post-federal economic slowdown. As Washington tightens spending, an economy built around federal dollars risks coming apart, revealing just how fragile Maryland's apparent prosperity has become. Number 9. Delaware. With a population just over 1 million, Delaware often flies under the radar. But beneath its quiet reputation lies one of the most financially vulnerable economies in the country. The state's economic model leans heavily on corporate registrations, banking, and chemical manufacturing, and all three pillars are now under strain. Falling corporate profits and shrinking federal transfers are squeezing revenues at the worst possible time. Corporate tax collections, which make up nearly 30% of Delaware's budget, dropped 14% in 2024, the steepest decline the state has seen in 20 years. As more companies choose to incorporate in business-friendly states like Texas and Florida, Delaware's long-standing role as America's corporate home base is rapidly losing ground. That erosion is already showing up in the state's finances. Delaware is projecting a $1.1 billion budget deficit for 2025, which works out to roughly $1,150 per resident. Families are feeling the pressure just as acutely. Median home prices hover around $370,000, while the typical household earns about $76,000 a year, a mismatch that has driven debt-to-income ratios into dangerous territory. Housing affordability has sharply deteriorated, with homeowners now needing to spend about 38% of their monthly income just to cover a standard mortgage. Foreclosure filings have surged 27% compared to last year, hitting areas like Newcastle County and Dover especially hard. The labor market isn't providing much relief either. Unemployment has climbed to 4.6%, and job growth in core industries such as finance and manufacturing has fallen by 11% over the past 12 months. At the same time, inflation remains stubborn, with food and energy prices rising more than 6% annually. Long-term obligations are compounding the risk. Delaware's state pension system carries roughly $84 billion in liabilities and is only about 65% funded, while local governments are struggling to meet pension promises for teachers and police officers. Because of Delaware's small size, economic shocks hit harder and spread faster. When even one major employer scales back, entire counties can feel the impact almost immediately. Consumer stress is already evident, with credit card delinquency rates reaching 6.3%, among the highest in the Mid-Atlantic region. The image of Delaware as a calm, stable corporate refuge is beginning to fracture. As revenues slide, pension gaps widen, and living costs climb, the first state may find itself among the earliest casualties when the next major recession fully takes hold. Number 8. Alaska. Alaska has always lived and died by oil, and when crude prices slip, the shockwaves travel through the entire state. In 2025, that long-standing reliance has become a serious weakness. Petroleum revenue still covers close to 40% of Alaska's operating budget, but the numbers are no longer working. The state needs oil prices around $76 per barrel just to break even, yet prices have lingered near $71 for months. That gap has forced Juneau to drain financial reserves at an unprecedented pace. Alaska is now facing a $1.2 billion budget deficit, and the permanent fund, once seen as untouchable, is increasingly being tapped simply to meet payroll obligations. Federal support adds another layer of risk. Roughly 40% of Alaska's total spending comes from federal dollars, a dangerous dependency if Washington moves to cut budgets during a nationwide downturn. At the same time, the state is shrinking. For 3 straight years, Alaska has lost more than 12,000 residents annually as workers head to the lower 48 in search of better pay and lower living costs. Despite that exodus, housing remains expensive. In Anchorage, median home prices are still around $394,000, while median household income sits near $86,300, leaving affordability strained even as people move away. The job market tells a similar story. Employment in oil and gas has steadily collapsed, falling from nearly 13,500 workers a decade ago to fewer than 8,900 today. Tourism, the state's second major economic pillar, is also weakening. Visitor activity dropped 9% in 2024, and cruise traffic has yet to return to pre-pandemic levels. As a result, the housing market is stalling. Home sales are down 18% year over year, and inventory has surged 32% as more residents put their properties on the market before leaving. Conditions are even harsher outside urban centers. Unemployment in rural areas has climbed past 8%, while the cost of basic necessities has become staggering. In some regions, milk now sells for $7.50 a gallon, and bread costs more than $6. Alaska's reputation for rugged self-reliance is being tested by a global economic slowdown. With oil royalties shrinking, population loss accelerating, and no diversified industry ready to step in, the last frontier risks turning into something hauntingly different. A vast, breathtaking landscape slowly hollowed out by economic decline. Number 7. New Mexico. New Mexico is caught in a dangerous overlap of federal dependence and energy sector volatility, a combination that becomes especially lethal during a recession. Nearly 43% of the state's budget is funded by federal dollars, while oil and gas account for roughly 30% of its overall economic output. When both of those revenue streams weaken at the same time, the state has very little room to absorb the shock. More than 22,000 federal workers in New Mexico now face the risk of layoffs or prolonged pay freezes. Budget analysts warn that even a modest 10% reduction in federal contracts could erase about 3% of the state's GDP almost instantly. The energy side of the equation has been just as unstable. In 2024, oil royalty revenue dropped 18%, prompting officials in Santa Fe to forecast a $900 million budget shortfall by 2026. The housing market, once viewed as relatively insulated, is also showing clear signs of strain. Albuquerque's median home price, which sits around $327,000, has fallen 9% since 2023, while available housing inventory has jumped nearly 25%. Foreclosure filings have doubled in just 1 year, and mortgage delinquency rates now stand at 4.8%, among the highest in the Southwest. For many residents, the financial pressure is relentless. The state's poverty rate is 18.4%, and with median household income at just $61,000, wages are failing to keep up with rising rents and food costs. Job growth has nearly stalled, advancing at only 0.4%, while youth unemployment has climbed past 9%. At the same time, violent crime rates, already about 70% higher than the national average, are discouraging new investment and business expansion. Long-term liabilities are adding to the instability. New Mexico's public pension system carries $14.6 billion in unfunded obligations and is only 62% funded, leaving future retirees increasingly exposed. Efforts to diversify the economy have also faltered. Tourism, film production, and manufacturing, all seen as potential stabilizers, contracted in 2024 as consumer demand weakened. With oil revenues shrinking, federal funding under threat, and living costs continuing to rise, New Mexico is positioned to feel every aftershock of a national downturn. What was once considered a quiet opportunity for investors is quickly turning into one of the country's most vulnerable economies, propped up more by subsidies and optimism than by sustainable growth. Number 6. Nevada. Nevada's post-pandemic surge has clearly run out of steam. The Silver State, long powered by entertainment, rapid construction, and speculative growth, is now experiencing one of the sharpest economic slowdowns in the country. Warning signs are flashing everywhere. Foreclosure filings have climbed to 1 in every 326 homes, the highest rate nationwide, while unemployment has jumped to 5.4%, up sharply from 3.9% just 12 months ago. Las Vegas, once the emblem of nonstop expansion, has become ground zero for housing stress. Active listings have ballooned by nearly 45% year over year, marking the 12th straight month of steep inventory growth. Although median home prices have dipped only 2.2% so far, industry insiders are bracing for an additional 10% to 12% drop as tourism weakens and layoffs spread. The state's heavy reliance on unpredictable revenue sources is amplifying the damage. Gaming taxes alone supply about 42% of Nevada's general fund, yet casino revenues are already down 8% compared to 2022 levels. Commercial real estate is unraveling even faster. Office vacancy rates have climbed to 24%, and delinquent commercial loans have surged 38% in just 1 year. At the household level, financial pressure is intense. The average monthly mortgage payment in Las Vegas now exceeds $2,780, while the median household income sits around $78,000. That imbalance forces many families to devote more than 43% of their take-home pay to housing costs. Consumer debt is also mounting, with credit card delinquency rates reaching a record 5.9% statewide. Tourism, the backbone of Nevada's economy, is no longer providing a cushion. Visitor numbers have fallen 7%, and convention bookings are down 15% as businesses tighten travel budgets. The slowdown has rippled into construction, where employment has dropped 12%. In Clark County alone, more than 14,000 homes now sit vacant, either waiting to be sold or tied up in foreclosure proceedings. Meanwhile, state tax revenue declined 6.3% in 2024, prompting warnings of a potential $1 billion budget gap by 2026. The illusion of endless prosperity is fading fast, exposing an economy weighed down by debt, speculation, and an over-reliance on chance. Nevada's downturn won't unfold quietly. It's shaping up to be sudden, highly visible, and deeply painful, transforming America's playground into one of the earliest victims of the next major economic collapse. Number 5. Louisiana. Louisiana's economy has been barely staying afloat for years, and now the current is pulling it under. With half of the state's budget dependent on federal funding and nearly 19% of its population living in poverty, Louisiana ranks among the most economically vulnerable states in the country. The typical household earns about $56,000 a year, yet the cost of basics, rent, insurance, utilities, and everyday necessities has jumped 14% in just 12 months, leaving many families stretched beyond their limits. Nowhere is the strain more visible than in New Orleans. Once praised for its resilience, the city is now considered the weakest housing market in the United States. Home values have already dropped 7.1% over the past year, with another 5.8% decline expected by mid-2025. In Orleans Parish, the median home price has slipped to $245,000, while the average time a property sits on the market has ballooned from 41 days to 74. Foreclosure activity has surged 34% statewide, and roughly 1 in every 402 homes is now classified as distressed. Louisiana's traditional economic backbone, oil and gas, is no longer providing stability. Employment in the energy sector has fallen 11% since 2022 as volatile oil prices and tightening federal environmental regulations discourage new investment. At the same time, insurance costs have become crushing. Hurricane-related losses from storms like Ida and Laura exceeded $20 billion, prompting several major insurers to exit the state altogether and driving premiums to unsustainable levels for homeowners and businesses alike. Commercial real estate is also sliding downhill. Office vacancy rates have climbed to 23% in Baton Rouge and 25% in Shreveport, while retail vacancies have reached 11%, the highest level seen in 2 decades. Long-term liabilities are piling up as well. Louisiana's public pension system carries $18.9 billion in unfunded obligations, and the state is projected to face a fiscal deficit exceeding $1.3 billion by 2026. Taken together, Louisiana is confronting a perfect storm: climate exposure, chronic economic stagnation, and political gridlock, all colliding at once. Once the economic pulse of the Gulf Coast, the state now risks becoming the first in the Deep South to slip into genuine financial insolvency, with no clear safeguards strong enough to stop it. Number 4. Florida. Florida's recent boom didn't just cool off. It's starting to look like a delayed detonation. After 3 years of rapid population growth and relentless home construction, stress fractures are now spreading across the entire state. Florida currently contains 9 of the 15 most overvalued housing markets in the country, a concentration unmatched anywhere else. Cities like Tampa, where prices are inflated by 42%, Cape Coral at 37%, and Northport at nearly 40%, have all drifted far beyond sustainable levels. Statewide, the median home price has climbed to $417,000, while the median household income lags at just $67,917. At today's mortgage rates near 7%, a typical family would need to earn close to $120,000 a year simply to qualify for an average home. That imbalance is already triggering a surge in foreclosures. 1 out of every 242 homes in Florida is now in default, making it the second worst state in the nation by that measure. In Lakeland, the situation is even more extreme, with 1 in every 172 homes entering foreclosure, the highest rate anywhere in the U.S. Insurance has become the next breaking point. Hurricane Ian alone caused $112.9 billion in damage, and since 2022, homeowners' insurance premiums have jumped more than 45%. The average policy now costs about $6,000 per year, roughly 3 times the national average. As major insurers like Farmers and AAA pull out of the state, millions of residents are being left to scramble for limited and expensive coverage. The rental market is showing signs of strain as well. Vacancy rates have climbed to 10%, and HOA fees are rising fast, increasing 15% over the past year. Meanwhile, wages are failing to keep pace. Job growth has slowed to just 0.8%, even as inflation remains elevated at 4.2%. Tourism, a pillar of Florida's economy, is no longer providing its usual support. Revenue from visitors is down 6%, and the hospitality sector shed 18,000 jobs in 2024 alone. Despite its strong population trends, Florida is heading straight into a perfect storm. Overpriced housing, a collapsing insurance system, and slowing migration are converging at once. Investors who bought near the peak in 2022 may now be staring at losses of 30% to 40%. What once looked like a sun-soaked promise of affordability and stability is rapidly dissolving, revealing a boom that may have always been more illusion than reality. Number 3. California's economy, once powerful enough to rank as the fifth largest in the world, is now buckling under the strain of years of excess and imbalance. The state is facing a staggering $58 billion budget deficit, the largest ever recorded, and is draining $12 billion from its reserves simply to keep basic operations afloat. Housing costs remain at the center of the crisis. The median home price has climbed to an eye-watering $825,000, which requires an annual income of roughly $237,000 to afford. In reality, the median household earns only $96,500, less than half of what's needed to buy an average home. That gap has pushed affordability to historic lows. Monthly mortgage payments now average around $5,900, swallowing 36% of household income, the highest housing burden in the country. At the same time, unemployment has risen to 5.5%, and Californians are voting with their feet. In 2024 alone, 239,000 residents left the state, marking the largest domestic population loss in the nation. Behind the scenes, long-term liabilities are piling up fast. California is carrying $244.9 billion in unfunded pension obligations, along with $20 billion in unemployment insurance debt. Public education is also under pressure, facing $5 billion in funding shortfalls. Meanwhile, the state's most reliable revenue engine is sputtering. Tax receipts from Silicon Valley have dropped 21% as tech profits contract and layoffs accelerate. Commercial real estate is unraveling at a pace few expected. Office vacancy rates have reached 28.8% in San Francisco and 22% in Los Angeles, while statewide commercial foreclosures now exceed 187 properties per month, nearly 30% of the national total. Even landmark assets aren't immune. The iconic LA Gas Company Tower, once valued at $632 million, is now facing foreclosure at a fraction of that price, roughly $200 million. Social and living costs continue to climb alongside the financial turmoil. Homelessness has surpassed 181,000 people statewide, while median rent in Los Angeles has reached $2,950 per month. Energy prices sit 42% above the national average, and utility bills rose another 11% in 2024 alone. A toxic mix of fiscal mismanagement, heavy regulation, and extreme housing costs has transformed the Golden State into a cautionary tale. California's economy is still enormous, but like its famous cliffs, it's wearing away rapidly, one collapse after another. Number 2. Illinois. Illinois isn't merely short on cash, it's fundamentally broken at the structural level. Years of corruption, unchecked spending, and pension mismanagement have transformed the state into a textbook example of long-term economic deterioration. The scale of the problem is staggering. Each Illinois taxpayer is effectively on the hook for about $38,800 just to cover existing obligations. In total, the state carries $172.8 billion in unfunded liabilities, placing it near the bottom of national fiscal rankings at 48th, ahead of only New Jersey and Connecticut. Looking ahead, the outlook doesn't improve. Budget projections for 2026 show a deficit ranging between $3.2 billion and $5.1 billion. Even under optimistic growth assumptions, the numbers don't add up. The teachers' retirement system, once viewed as the backbone of Illinois' public workforce, is now only 34% funded and could exhaust its resources within the next 20 years. That reality puts tens of thousands of retired educators in a precarious position, relying on a system that simply isn't mathematically sustainable. Chicago, the state's economic heart, is buckling under similar pressure. Property taxes have climbed 16% since 2021, while violent crime has surged 34% over the past 5 years. Businesses are pulling out of the downtown core, leaving office buildings increasingly empty. Vacancy rates have reached 18.8%, and average rents have fallen sharply to $27.30 per square foot, down from $34 before the pandemic. Across the metro area, nearly 1,976 bank-owned REO properties now sit unused, the highest concentration anywhere in the country. The population trend adds another layer of stress. Illinois lost 84,000 residents in 2024 alone, marking the ninth consecutive year of decline. Each family that leaves shrinks the tax base further, deepening the state's already dangerous debt spiral. At the same time, living costs continue to rise. Electricity prices run 18% above the national average, and when adjusted for inflation, household incomes have barely moved since 2019. What makes Illinois' situation especially dire is the lack of an easy solution. Raising taxes accelerates outmigration, while cutting spending risks defaulting on promises already made to workers and retirees. That leaves the state stuck in a no-win scenario, a fiscal time bomb quietly ticking away. When the next recession tightens credit markets, Illinois could become the first major state since the Great Depression forced to openly confront insolvency, not as a political failure, but as an unavoidable mathematical reality. Number 1. New Jersey. New Jersey's financial emergency stands apart from the rest because the clock is already almost at zero. State auditors have issued a stark warning. New Jersey has just 2 days' worth of operating reserves on hand, the thinnest financial cushion of any state in the country. When you break it down, each taxpayer is effectively responsible for about $44,500 simply to keep the state functioning. Meanwhile, total unfunded liabilities have ballooned past $220 billion, a burden that continues to grow despite years of tax increases. The pension system highlights just how deep the problem runs. The Teachers' Pension Fund, the largest in New Jersey, is funded at only 34.7%, making it the weakest major public pension plan in the United States. Even with repeated efforts to raise revenue, the debt curve keeps climbing. Looking ahead to 2026, the state is projecting a $5.3 billion budget gap, and its much-praised rainy day fund could be wiped out in a single quarter if revenues slip by as little as 5%. Housing pressures are adding fuel to the fire. New Jersey now holds the second highest foreclosure rate in the nation, with 1 in every 359 homes in default. In Atlantic City, the situation is far worse, where roughly 1 in 200 homes is already in foreclosure. At the same time, median home prices surged 19% year-over-year to $539,000, creating the conditions of a classic housing bubble just as inventory rises and mortgage rates linger near 7%. Commercial real estate is unraveling alongside the residential market. Office vacancy rates in the Newark, Jersey City corridor have climbed past 19.4%, and the commercial sector alone is seeing about 42 foreclosures every month. Everyday costs continue to rise faster than incomes. Property taxes now average $9,800 per household each year, the highest in the country, while energy prices sit 33% above the national average. Insurance premiums added another 12% increase in 2024. Yet for all those costs, economic growth remains anemic. State GDP expanded by just 0.7%, well below the national pace. This is the core contradiction of New Jersey's economy. Relatively high incomes paired with even higher obligations. Residents earn more, but retain less. Small businesses struggle under layers of regulation, and infrastructure spending barely makes a dent in aging roads and rail systems. In the end, the picture is bleak. The Garden State is overtaxed, heavily indebted, and rapidly running out of options. When recession pressures fully take hold, New Jersey won't be dealing with a routine budget problem. It will be confronting an existential fiscal crisis. A collapse decades in the making is no longer theoretical. It's standing right at the door.